Jer si milostivi čovekoljubiv Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold, from valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to mysteries and majesty. Study with us, and don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy, and horror. Dungeons and dragons, Skyrim and Mordor. And Mordor, powers haunt the evening in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages, we chronicles keep storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
For centuries, but especially lately, there have been so many unnecessarily debates and division between people who doubt God's existence and people of faith who would be arguing and debating when it comes to if the book of nature would be compatible with the book of scriptures. And as I was thinking about Dr. Ross, who was our guest a couple of years ago, and I was thinking about science as part of God's design, his intelligent design, and how he made everything perfect for our habitat to not just exist, but also to flourish. I've been thinking how majestic God is and how good as a father and creator he is in order to do all of this. So welcome to episode 191. Tonight I have privilege to welcome Dr. Vaughn Mancha for the first time when it comes to the podcast. He's one of the scholars that work for or with Dr. Hugh Ross and his organization, Reasons to Believe. Dr. Mancha, thank you so much for finding time for myself and for the audience. Welcome on the podcast. And if we can maybe start by you saying something about your work, relationship to Dr. Ross and his organization.
Well, I grew up as a young Christian, actually, who started getting really interested in the scripture. And I followed a pastor out in Houston who taught exegetically, and I studied a great deal under him. And he taught actually what's called the gap theory. So when I went to college, I really didn't have any problems with the age of the earth issue because the gap seemed to explain those things. Once I got into practice, I just happened to turn on TBN late at night, and there was this guy by the name of Hugh Ross that had this single table. He was all alone, and he started explaining all these different things that just absolutely blew my mind. And so I started reading his books, and I wound up bumping into other people who read his books. Later I decided to join his organization as a visiting scholar. And I do that as well as I do a lot of Facebooking. I write a lot of articles, usually using Google Gemini as a helpful writing tool. And so that's kind of where I stand. Currently, I'm retired, and I enjoy reading a great deal. So I'm involved with a group that we meet once a month, a Reasons to Believe group. And I'm thinking about going on campus because of the recent stuff that's happened with Charlie Kirk and trying to challenge young people to how they think critically.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. It helps us understand where you're coming from. For tonight's topic, Dr. Mancha will help me dissect this book called Improbable Planet. Hopefully, that's just first of the books that we'll be covering eventually when it comes to Dr. Ross. And even more importantly, it's not about Dr. Ross, but it's about understanding that science and faith are not fighting, they're not opposing each other. So our goal for tonight is not to go against fundamentalists, it's not to propose this or that theory, but to help everyone, believers and non-believers, understand that your coincidence, your life is not a coincidence. Your life matters, and the way God made you and where God put you, it's all by design and because of His love. So maybe we can start with the first chapter, Dr. Mancha, and maybe you can tell us something about the question that Dr. Ross is asking. He says, well, are Earth's life-sustaining features just quote unquote amazing coincidences? So maybe you can tell us something about the intelligent design and fine-tuning of the universe.
Well, first off, he talks about the fact that the density of our universe is incredibly fine-tuned. He actually makes the point somewhere else that if we had so much as a dime's difference in mass at the beginning of the singularity, things would not have turned out the way they are. Because a lot of people ask this question, why are all these stars and we're just a little part in it? Isn't it a waste for God to make things that way? But this density that makes up the universe is the thing that drives the dark energy and just how the universe expands the way it does. 70% of our universe is made up of this dark energy. We have no idea what it is. And yet it is so finely tuned as to be one chance in 10 to the 120th power, which is just incredible. And the Bible actually talks about it, that God stretches the universe at least 12 times in the Old Testament. There's a real good YouTube done by Leonard Susskind, who's a physicist, who's agnostic. And he says this figure of 1 to the times 10 to the 120th is not just luck. Nobody believes it's just luck. It's just amazing. And nobody really can understand it.
Yeah, from the very chapter and moving towards the end of the book, Dr. Ross in every chapter provides, hey, let's talk about gravity, let's talk about heat, let's talk about location of not just planet but also Milky Way. He always gives percentage statistics and scientific reasons. He's like, if this criteria, let's call it criteria, would be lower or higher, life wouldn't exist. In every chapter, he provides these statistics and these very strong arguments. I'm like, how precise God had to make not just our planet, but our solar system,
and
Milky Way galaxy, and the whole universe for our life to exist.
And these are not just figures that he comes up with. He quotes all the different scientists who came up with these ideas. And it's astounding. I mean, these guys, like who's mentioning Dias, who said, the more I study the universe, the more it seems like it was designed for our parents to come online. And I mean, more and more people like that. It's just, they're astounded. How did these things how are things just so for our existence? One example is our galaxy. Our galaxy, there's no other galaxy that's like ours. You have to have exactly a galaxy like ours to have advanced life form. And there was another book that actually Hugh Ross probably borrowed a lot on when he wrote this one. It was written by a guy by the name of Peter Ward. He was a paleontologist, anthropologist, and he wrote a book called Rare Earth Hypothesis. And it's standard reading in the colleges today. And he says many of the same things. At one point, he said, even if you had some God of immense power, it would just be completely unlikely that he'd be able to do this. So, he's taking a flack on it. So he's an unbeliever, but still he recognizes it's incredibly rare.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it because context and other sources, especially when it comes to academia, mean a lot to me, and I believe to many, to a lot of audience out there, be it believers or non-believers, who don't want to just like be told, hey, well, just accept it or just believe it. No, give me also data, give me numbers, give me sources, so it will make sense to me, because we have a lot of intellectual people who don't accept blind faith, and I don't blame them. So thank you for that data.
Well,
Well,
there's an interesting fact. If you look at the last 100 years of Nobel Prizes, 70% of them are Christian. So, and there's plenty of quotes from these guys that realize that the universe is just the fine-tuning features of the universe are just too remarkably small to just be coincidence.
yeah, and after reading this book by Dr. Ross, I mean, I knew maybe,
Oh
I
no.
don't know, maybe 1% of the whole book. And again, this is one of the 4 books I own by Dr. Ross. After reading that book, chapter after chapter, I like my jaw was just dropping. I'm like, God, this is
Uh,
insane in a most majestic and respectful way.
yeah,
Like, God, our
I
our
had to
life is literally a miracle.
Yeah, I had to put a wet towel around my head as I read it. I mean, it was just unbelievable the things that he brings out, and they're not his stuff. They're scientists that he quotes. It's
Yeah,
astounding.
as I was talking with my church friend today when we went out to eat, I'm like, man, so many people, including Christians, we take life for granted. You just are. You just exist, and that's it. But if you would think about scientific details that had to happen, like laws, gravity, you mentioned dark matter. We mentioned Milky Way. We mentioned solar system, the proper distance and the size of the sun. Um, we had to mention the we had to mention. I mean, Dr. Ross mentioned. He mentioned temperature. He mentioned throughout the age of the Earth, all these different eras happening that will bring formation of the continents, that will bring from unicell, and we'll talk about this, simple lives to the further existence. Comets and asteroids bring minerals and water. These things happen, and again, this episode is not to be controversial. You can believe whoever you are that the planet is only 6,000 years old. That's fine. We're talking about scientific level without even including evolution. We're just speaking from scientific level where the earth is way older than just 6,000 years. But my point is, God preparing and paving the way, all of that, for the most advanced life, for humans to start existing. But he had to tame all this chaos. And even Dr. Ross uses a couple of times this word chaos. Like, God had to deal with that and bring life to this planet after all of that was done to exist. And again, continents had to form, moon had to be formed, all of these things, and everything had to be at perfect size and perfect length, perfect distance, perfect temperature. Oxygen was improper at the beginning. I mean, the amount of oxygen. We had to wait for all these things. It's just like a cook preparing slowly, in a most majestic way, his masterpiece. Like, let's say, I don't know, whatever people like eating. Let's say it's the best cake you'll eat in your whole life. That takes time. It takes preparation. It takes so much. It takes you perfecting all the details so that cake will be the best one. And for God, we are the best one, the crown of His creation. So I was just blown away chapter after chapter.
Well, that's one of the interesting things that he points out. I mean, we just didn't show up, on this planet, already fully made. There had to be all these series of other things that occurred before the atmosphere could exist, or the right amount of CO2, or the right amount of nitrogen. I mean, every stage had to occur in its right situation. Even, one thing that I've noticed is he mentioned the boring billion, and that was when we were an ice planet for a while. We had 5 periods of that. But even when we were a boring billion, all kinds of stuff was occurring with regard to microscopic organizations that were preparing the world for once it popped out of that. So the odds of it is like a pool shot that's just incredible. One of the interesting things, and I just wrote this blog about it on my Facebook group, Apologetics and God and Science, was the fact that the angels watched all this stuff being done right down to the time the Earth was made. And these guys are like supercomputers on steroids. they knew exactly what was occurring, and they could see if this happens, this is going to happen. So they could see the preparation that God was making with the earth, and they testified to it. They watched the whole thing, and they spoke basically to his glory and power and majesty, and they were the witnesses of it. And they were all singing together at this time. They were all in the same thing. Now, Satan did something happened to Satan in the Garden of Eden, actually, where he had all these wonderful jewels, and he said, and I think these jewels were put on him to basically like the Pharisees, the priests in the Old Testament. They represented certain parts of God's holiness, and he suddenly thought that, hey, he was beautiful, and he became perverted in his viewpoint of himself, and then he fell. But so that's an interesting story. Another story, though. By the way, I saw that your theme deals with some of the Nephilim, I'm guessing. Yeah, you might want to tell your viewers there's a series called House of David on Prime right now, and they actually do a phenomenal CGI of the Nephilim, and this beautiful woman is standing there, and this angel comes up to her and basically embraces her. And this is basically how Goliath and his brothers were made, according to some beliefs. But it's a phenomenal thing. I mean, it surely beats the movie Noah, where these rock creatures came down, rock'em sock'em rock creatures. I mean, I couldn't believe Scott messed that so bad.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about the movie that came out 10, 15 years ago, right?
Yeah, it was terrible.
Not very biblical, yeah.
Well, no, it's not that it was unbiblical. Genesis 6 is like pure science fiction. Tell it like it is. I mean, really, if you think about it, these angels coming down and inhabiting with women and the products of it, and then the flood as a result of that. Whereas in his mind, the angels came down to help mankind, and they were turned into rock creatures, which is totally unbiblical, There was actually only one good part in the movie when they were sitting inside in the ark, and Russell Crowe told them about the beginnings of everything and how it unfolded. But then it wound up showing basically evolution at the end. So.
Yeah, that's the Hollywood creation, right? Because it sells. When it comes to chapter 2, which Dr. Ross titled "The Way the World Is," he mentions some key subtitles called "Preserved Record of the Past," "Persistent Life," and some others. So maybe we can start talking a little bit about these records and persistent life. What is the data telling us about fossils and other things that he's talking when it comes to the abundance of data?
Well, yeah, I mean, the preserved records of the past include things like zircons, which are basically diamond-like things that have lead in them, and they decay at a certain rate. We can tell exactly how old the Earth's crust is, and not only that, but exactly when life began. And so there's all these sort of things that they can trace by looking at the Earth's crust and geology. And it's really quite incredible as they start breaking it out, that these series of events had to have occurred in a specific way. And what's fascinating about it is that certain scientists don't like the anthropic principle because that lends towards an intelligent designer. And so they try to come up with stuff that really gives them wiggle room. But every time they do it, their own people show them they're wrong, because of the preserved things that are in the past. And it drives them crazy. So they try to come up with something else. But ultimately, they all fail in the end.
Yeah, thanks for that. What about when it comes to abundance, diversity, and when life switched to simple to complex? I know that Dr. Ross likes mentioning a lot of millions and billions of years. So maybe we don't have to give every statistics, but how was life switching from more simple unicell to more complex life before even humankind came?
Well, basically, I believe that the timeline is basically that, one of the things that's remarkable is when they look at the Large Hadron Colliding Event, which was 3.8 billion years ago, they believed that it would be just about impossible for a new life to suddenly arise. But as they looked at it over and over again, they discovered that life suddenly showed up just about 10 million years afterwards, which is just absolutely unbelievable from a prebiotic world where you just got soup to making complex organisms. Now, these complex organisms showed up right after all this collision time. And then it wasn't until about 400 million years ago that we got advanced life that we have today. So that's 3.5 billion years of preparation for advanced life. And, it was all required a whole series of steps, different types of bacteria, whether they're anaerobic or aerobic, whether they can break down certain things like sulfide bonds, or whether they can get rid of the stuff that's dangerous to upper living creatures like us, whether they can get rid of iron oxides and other things. And they have to be everywhere. They have to be in all parts of the earth, preparing the earth to get it ready. Not only that, but all this stuff that they started to derive for us has made it possible for us to have modern conveniences today. If they hadn't have done these things, we might just still be in the Stone Age, left in the Stone Age, because we simply don't have the irons and all the things that can make polymers and other things as they come along. So that's an incredible pool shot once again.
Yeah, just one thing for the audience. Again, for our friends who are on the more fundamentalist side and young Earth creationists, if you have questions about the Genesis 1, or if you think that each day represents literal 24-hour day, a week ago we covered that topic with another scholar. So please go back to the episodes we did last Sunday when we covered with Dr. Chavalas both biblical and Mesopotamian sources for creation. And the way that chapter 1 can be understood in so many ways, including not being literal and certainly not every day representing literal 24 hours. Because just take when Adam was created, look how he was strolling around, observing everything, being lonely, naming all the animals. Earth, he was put to sleep so that Eve can be created. They fall in love, mate. This is most probably not just 24 hours. Heck, it could have been years. So again, if you have issues with what days are mentioning and speaking when it comes to Genesis 1 and 2, and if you think that science is inevitably some secular discipline that is from Satan and wants to confuse us, not necessarily. If you are a literalist and fundamentalist, that may be an issue for you, but just a kind reminder, check that episode we did last Sunday and see how Genesis 1 and 2 can be understood in different ways. And most scholars are not seeing days to be literal 24 hours. Not even to mention that Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 are speaking about Earth existing already before day 1 started. So by the end of October, we'll dedicate one episode just to the gap theory, and we'll talk more about it. But I just want to encourage people who think in a most literal wooden way and would want to call other people names and condemn them and judge them as not taking God's word seriously. We do take. I don't know Dr. Mancha very well, but I see his posts on Facebook. He takes God seriously. He takes Bible seriously. We're not going against God at all. It's just the way that some people interpret the Bible, especially the beginning, in the most wooden way, it doesn't do the justice to the way the ancient people taught. So we're continuing when it comes to the science. And again, we're not going against God or Bible.
To add on to what you said, on Genesis day 6, Adam named the kinds, which are not necessarily the species, because there's like 8 million species. Even young Earth creationists agree with old Earth creationists about that. At least that there was at least 8,000. You would have literally had to run the animal past yourself to name them in time. And then, when Eve comes on, he says "at last" in the Hebrew. The same "at last" that Jacob said when he saw his son in Egypt. He said, "At last I can die." So basically, and not only that, did he just grab her and throw her on the ground and have his way with her? No, he courted her over time. Nobody here just immediately met their wife unless it was a one-night stand or something. So he had some time to court her, and it had to have been over a long period, along Genesis day 6, in my opinion.
Yeah, makes sense. And I mean, after Eve's creation, God set him to be priests and farmers. You don't just, if you're just born now, you don't just go and do the work automatically unless someone taught you. So there's also a process of learning, training, getting acquainted with the Garden of Eden, which wasn't a small garden that you may have behind your house. It was a big one. Get to know all the animals, get to know spiritual beings, get to know so many things when it comes to not just supernatural realm, but also physical realm, geography. That will take time. Adam had to, probably patrol, quote unquote, take everything under his control, make sure everything is planted, everything is growing, to go and as a farmer take care of everything. That doesn't happen in one day. That would be impossible.
Yeah, also on day 6, there's a river that comes down and splits and goes around the garden. You don't see that happening in a few minutes. Basically, it takes time for rivers to do that, and there's no indication First Genesis that things happen at a hyper accelerated rate. The only way to look at that is called eisegesis, where you read your own opinion into the text. You're not exegeting and pulling it out of the text. The ancient Hebrew knew that when rivers split apart, it was a normal part of the way that geology gradually developed. And that also, you look at the plants, they had seeds in them. It was a normal seed development of plants and growth. They understood that. It wasn't some, if you're going to make things supernatural, just make the plants. Don't have any seeds in them. But no, they have the seeds and they develop the seeds and they come out with them and create new plants. So,
That's a good point. Dr. Mancha, one question just went through my mind. I don't know what is Dr. Ross's stand on this, but I will ask you for your opinion. Based on the material that Dr. Ross explains how Earth began, even before the foundation of Earth, how everything had to be put together, time to pass, universe to expand, and all of these things. Do you think this was happening in that gap theory in Genesis 1-2?
Well, okay, now I don't hold to the gap theory anymore, but yes, I would say that the gap between there is the beginning of the universe and all the stars. And however, the Earth was made by a protoplanetary disk, and when that protoplanetary disk forms, the planets form around it. And the real description of that is in Job 38. He says that he covered it with a thick covering, just like planetary discs. And he said he molded it like clay. That's exactly the asteroids that are hitting it, forming it like clay. This is when the angels were singing together. So they could see that the Earth was being prepped and ready for life, and they were celebrating it. It was an incredibly accurate thing. And these angels, by the way, probably went throughout the rest of the universe, and they couldn't find anything like this going on out there. Our one planet was perfect, and they knew it, and they knew God made it that way. That's part of it. And anyway, the protoplanetary disk came up back in 2012. I debated a Earth creationist, and one of the things I said was that Answers in Genesis said we will never see a new star forming, a protoplanetary disk. Well, 2 years later, the AMA array came out, which has 56 big telescopes in the Indies, and they showed the exact replica of that protoplanetary disk. So this guy was just stunned. He didn't know what to say when I showed him that. I said, "Look, this is the way the Earth is formed, and it makes sense. It's a gradual, slow development, and everything in it is right out of Job." It says the Earth had a cornerstone. That's exactly, accretion done by a protoplanetary disk. It's exactly the description of how the Earth formed. You don't see any of these things in Genesis 1 at all. So Genesis 1 does not include all the details in Job 38 are probably between verse 1 and verse 2 in Genesis 1. So there are all these other things. But that's the problem. When you look at these websites, they say, Genesis is it for us. It's almost like they don't look at any other chapters, but really the largest number of creation verses is outside of Genesis. Genesis is just kind of a recap of everything.
Yeah, I remember years ago I was watching Dr. Russ's debate with either Canham or someone else, and they were talking about Genesis, the age of the universe, And Dr. Russ, oh, God bless him, he's so kind and patient. I don't know if I'll be so patient with everyone. But he was going and trying to explain to Dr. Canham about so many creation verses out of Genesis. But Dr. Canham, unless it was someone else that he debated with, again, this was years ago, he was like, no, 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 let's take to Genesis 1. No, 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 let's take to Genesis 1. But Dr. Russ was telling him, okay, we're debating about Genesis, but there's so many other verses and passages in the Old Testament that use the same Hebrew terminology. They speak about similar points in human history. Why not cross-referencing with them? And Dr. Russ is like, let's just open the window and open our minds and see all this plethora of verses that speak about the same thing. But yeah, that's the problem. If we just take 1 or 5 or 10 isolated verses here and there, and we don't want to open our minds and hearts to any other source or do the cross-referencing, I think that can be a danger to our theology.
Well, yeah. I mean, how many different Christian sects are out there who just interpret certain things the way they want to interpret it, whereas Paul says all things are written and rightly divide the word of truth, and we have to rightly divide the word of truth. We can't just take one thing and assume that's going to cover all of it. And again, you really run the risk of eisegesis, reading things into it. And a perfect example of that is Genesis 7, where it talks about the springs that spring forth from during the flood. Well, they want using eisegesis, they want to say, well, that's causing geology, that's causing gem formation, that's causing fossil formation. And it's really only about 7 words, and none of those things are mentioned literally. And they always like to say, take the word literal. But then they cut themselves off this big, slice. And I don't care where you go in a Young Earth Creationist website, they're always taking Genesis 7 and trying to impose it on modern geology or things. And so they don't have any sense of depth of time, because they're saying everything is 6 literal days old. But when you go to Job, on the other hand, like chapter 28, it talks about the fire below that's transforming the rocks and making jewels and things. That doesn't happen overnight, and they can't handle that because it destroys their narrative. There's Isaiah talks about about bringing out the stars one at a time and naming them. Well, that's a process. That just didn't happen, an instantaneous creation of all stars. He named each one of them. And you can see these protoplanetary stars out there, and they all look different. And sure enough, he brought them out one at a time, and he's got his name for them.
Yeah, one last thing before we continue with chapter 2. I don't like whenever I will have friendly conversation with our fundamentalist friends, who, if I would tell them something similar, like, look, this process took time. And they would always say, it's almost like bring this magical recipe, like, oh, but God can do anything, so he could have just snapped his fingers and do something instantly. I'm like, well, yeah, he can, but that doesn't necessarily mean he did. So for them, that seems to be many times often the solution to bring this magical formula in the whole debate, and well, God did it and he did it fast. He did it.
Hold on a second. Can he do those things? And I would suggest to you that he cannot, because he's made promises to keep things a certain way. It says in Jeremiah 33 that I have fixed the laws of the heavens, and neither will I break them, as will I break my promise to David to bring the Messiah back. So they're basically saying, oh, well, the Messiah is not going to come back because he can break his promise to that. No, he can't. That's a promise that he's made. And all these things show his glory. Is he going to reduce his glory by not showing it to us? He says he knows we shall know the beginning from the end. If we have just magic time that suddenly pops up, you'll never know these things. There's just a lethargy of things that destroy those arguments. God promises himself that he's going to follow things in a certain way, and he cannot break those promises. They're fixed. And, now as true, could God make a rock so big that he couldn't lift it? Well, theoretically he could. In fact, he could have made the earth, everything 8 seconds ago and given us the impression that it's been here all along. But he won't, because he can't, because he makes promises to his nature that he's not going to be that way. And so okay. For instance, in Job, it says, can you take light to its way that it will finally wind up in a place? that means light moves. It's not created instantly, as the younger creationists would like to say, but it actually moves and it has an abode to which it goes. So these sort of verses tell us that these are the principles that God has built his universe on.
Yeah, I know we digressed a little bit in the last 10 minutes, but I enjoyed this conversation. Even though it wasn't planned, it wasn't according to the outline, but it was so cool and hopefully helpful to many people out there. But let's finish with chapter 2. I like this last sub-chapter that's called Three Creations of Life. And basically, Dr. Ross says that science confirms what the Bible actually says, that first, primitive life with a unicellular bacterial life started existing. Then the second type would be the group of animals that possessed mind. And then the third one is the type of life that started existed would be, also possessing non-physical attributes. And this will be the species of Homo sapiens, of people, of us. So anything that you would like to comment on when it comes to this last section of chapter?
Well, it's interesting. If you look at the very first part of Genesis 1, it talks about the Holy Spirit brooding above the waters. And when you compare that to a Deuteronomy passage, the brooding is the same thing as a bird brooding on their eggs, if you will. So in essence, if he was brooding on the waters, he was in essence dealing with early life, probably. Now that might be eisegesis on my behalf, but on the other hand, there's a lot of theologians who do believe that is the case. So, and it makes sense that he's brooding and starting life as a beginning. And then, of course, he brings out certain animals depending on, like the creepy crawly animals who are not nephesh beings. And then he brings out the nephesh beings that Adam names. And the nephesh beings are like your dog and your cat who can relate to you. They have a basic format soul, although they don't have a spirit like we do. But nevertheless, they want to relate with us, and they're here to relate with us. And, Hugh Ross talks about how when he was a kid, he would always go hiking out into to the Rockies of Canada, and all these animals would just come up to him. I mean, they had no fear of human beings. So they just showed up and wanted to interface with him. And it was like, Dr. Doolittle. So, it was astounding. He said that these animals were nephesh beings, and they wanted to interact with him, and they had no fear of him. And that would have been kind of the way it was in the garden. There wasn't the fear because, man hadn't started killing animals at that point. And so they were very naive, just as man was naive to sin.
That's a good point, and reminds me of Revelation, where God will restore the order, and there will be no more enmity between some wild animals and humans, where everything will be put back to the original order. So we don't have to fear the wild animals, they don't have to fear us. So that will be a true paradise.
Well, they talk about a child will put his hands down the hole of the vipers, and they won't hurt him. And the lion will lay down with the lamb. I mean, this is an astounding period that's going to happen in the millennium. It could be a science fiction book. And the remarkable part about it is all the Christians that are listening now, and you and I, we will be there in resurrection bodies, and we will rule over certain areas, and we'll actually have angels in tow. And if somebody commits a heinous crime, that person will be executed almost instantly, and everybody will know about it. And this is actually going to probably create a lot of discontent, because at the end of the millennium, there's a large number of people that Satan rouse up to attack Israel one last time. And that's probably, you can see it now. What if these guys that are burning down stuff, what if you were controlling them so that they couldn't burn down stuff? They would be pissed off to no end. But it will be perfect. I mean, everybody will live for 1,000 years. Economy will be perfect. I mean, you'll walk up to two people who are trying to make a business deal, and you'll say, okay, what are you going to do for him? And what are you going to do for him? And let's shake hands. You don't need a lawyer. I'll be back. We'll talk about it in 6 months. If it's not working out, you're going to pay him back threefold or twofold for you're trying to cheat him, So it's going to be a remarkable period.
Yeah, thanks for that. Switching to chapter 3, which is a very short one. It's called Essential Construction Materials, and it has only 2 sub-chapters called Just Right Mass and Just Right Age. And here, Dr. Ross goes again into so many small details. He speaks of the solar system. He speaks of the sun's energy. universe being so massive, mass density of matters, building blocks, protons and neutrons. Then he switches later to speak about waiting for 9 billion years when it comes to the universe existed before construction of our home planet could get underway. So again, when it comes to these two subchapters of just right mass and just right age, what is your comment when it comes to the most interesting and most important aspects of this chapter?
Well, actually, I had mentioned this early on, but the mass density determines the cosmic stretching rate, the dark energy. And the reason is if you don't have enough mass, you're not going to have enough stretching, and the surface on that stretching surface has to be exactly correct. I mean, we're talking about 1 times 10 to the 120th power correct. So that's why we have to have exactly the right density of the universe for the dark matter to work correctly. And that's the biggest thing that he's talking about. So basically, the dark energy and cosmic density have to be fine-tuned for life incredibly, because if they're not set up, there's no life can occur. If the density is too much, everything will collapse into neutron stars and black holes. If it's too little, everything will spread out into hydrogen, basically. So yeah, I mean, it's just incredibly, so this controls everything, those two factors.
Okay, thank you.
So he also said this is not why it's wasted time. This time had to occur slowly for it to get just right. So it's not, everyone asks the question, well, all these billions of years, isn't that wasted time? No, he had to do it correctly. He had to do it that way. And what's the interesting thing is he's unfolded all this stuff very, very slowly according to the way it has to be by natural methods, even though he started it with almost a supernatural beginning. So if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me again of Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. Like, it's not, there was nothing. There was nothing at the very absolute beginning except God's spiritual realm. Yes. But at Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, we already have water. We already have darkness. We already have earth. It wasn't habitable, but it already existed. So when God provided basic material, then construction started happening.
Well, I think, too, what you're talking about is that phrase, tohu wabohu, that everything was wasted. But if you look in Isaiah, he said, I did not make the earth to be tohu wabohu, but to be formulated and inhabited. So that now the gap theory tries to take tohu wabohu, is that the earth was once all there, and then it goes into tohu wabohu due to angelic stuff and pre-Adamic race of beings, and then God resuscitated it. But I don't think that's correct anymore.
Okay, when it comes to chapter 4, it's a bit a lengthy one, so let's do little by little most of the major subchapters. When it comes to subchapter making room, Dr. Ross says, to state the obvious point, the universe is not static. It is dynamic. It has been continually expanding from that moment onward. At one point, the universe became large enough that stars and galaxies began to form. However, when the universe was very young, these galaxies were jammed so tightly together that they routinely ripped spiral arms, sides of strong star formation off of one another due to the pull of gravity. Can we maybe comment, please, when it comes to making room for everything?
When you see these deep field astronomy pictures from the Webb telescope, and they look way back in time, you can see these small galaxies, and they don't have the arms because they're all colliding into one another. We have to be a spiral galaxy. Only a spiral galaxy can support life, and the reason is you have to be right in a gap of the arms of these spiral galaxies in order to be protected from the center of it, which is a black hole, and it can't be too strong or not strong enough. And the galaxy has to rotate just the right amount, which basically, as you see, there's a series of spiral galaxies here, and the top left one is too wide. The next one over is still too wide. And if you see our galaxy, it's almost a perfect spiral. So it's kind of like it's the only way to. I think ours is on the bottom left, maybe. which you notice how it has a perfect spiral to it. Now, if your planet is in between the little bands there, it's able to survive what's going on, because if you get into the band, you get hit with all kinds of stuff, and this occurs every so often. The width of these galaxies are, say 1,000 light years across, and if as you undulate back and forth across it, you'll come across these bands, and that can cause massive destruction to the planet and the solar system. So it has to ride at just the right amount. And not only that, but the spiral has to be a zero turn to it. It has to match in just the right amount, so that the solar system will get in one of those bands, and it'll ride along. The other important thing is, just from and you can see these other spirals that are not capable to handle life, because your solar system will get in a bad part of it or a lower part of it. So, however, one of the important things too is our ability to look at the universe. If we weren't in one of these just in the right positions, we would not be able to see anything. It would all just be a light blaze. Now, I know that doesn't mean anything, but it does, because we have the ability to know the universe as a result of where we're at. We can see things around us in ways that other galaxies can't show.
Yeah, thanks for that. I just wanted to share it because I know that some people like me, they're visual, so they like seeing stuff so they can understand better. When it comes to the next subchapter, narrowing in, Dr. Ross says, to meet the needs of advanced life, not only old spiral galaxy will do. First, new stars must form there at a rate that can sustain the galaxy's spiral structure and symmetry. If the rate is too slow or unsteady, the galaxy will lack the low-density regions where a planetary system can survive, free from the disruption caused by gravitational interactions with other stars and molecular clouds. Star formation must also be sufficiently aggressive to produce the essential kinds and quantities of heavy elements and potential planets and life forms will need. And then he says, second, the spiral galaxy must be neither too big nor too small. A galaxy more massive than the Milky Way will form a huge supermassive black hole at its nucleus. So again, God had to make everything perfect for life to exist. Any comment on this section?
Well, one thing is about the star formation. The star formations, you have to have the right star formations, because they will go into, many of these stars will go into supernova. And this supernova will blow up and provide all the elements for life. And we as a planet, we go right through that, that cloud. And there's at least 5 different supernova types that we have to go through. He was pointing out just how rare iodine is, and yet life can't exist without iodine, and yet they come from supernova. Almost that one point alone makes it incredibly rare. So we had to have a supernova that blew iodine out into the air so we could go through it, so that our thyroids would function correctly, or that we could even have thyroid tissues. If we don't have thyroids, we can't exist as a living being. Thyroid just does way too many things. So that's part of what he's talking about. You got to have enough stars, which means you got to have star formation. You also have to have little clusters of galaxies that are at least about 100 of them. They're around your galaxy. They're small ones that feed material into this one. And you can't have too many of those. You can't have too little of those. It's kind of like the story about the 3 bears, just right,
I love that analogy. That make me go back to my childhood, and I was laughing and enjoying. When it comes to the following subchapters, stabilizing the local, Dr. Ross says that Milky Way galaxies' lesser star mass and angular momentum have now been identified as important and unexpected factors in making possible a long history of life. Again, not just our planet, but also Milky Way, the whole galaxy had to be properly designed. And I do remember that somewhere in the book I read that Dr. Ross said that our neighbor galaxy, which is Andromeda,
Yeah.
is kind of similar to ours, but yet life over there didn't happen, and it's not possible. But yet in our galaxy, it is possible because God fine-tuned it way more for life, and I'm like blown away over and over again. So when it comes to our galaxy,
Yeah, in fact, he makes the point that the majority of spiral galaxies are like the Andromeda, not like ours. In fact, they haven't found one that's just like ours. You'd hear it on the news, like, holy cow, we found, exactly what we're looking for. What's crazy about it is they go out there and they find some planet with water on it that's, 70 light years away. Okay, well, you're going to have to jump into a ship that's about the size of the Death Star to take enough fuel to push you fast enough and overcome Einstein's E equals mc squared, because as you go faster, your mass increases and you have to go faster, and you're going to go off to some star and never see your civilization again. And if you get there and it's not just right, you're all going to die. So who's going to go on that mission? This is, by the way, this is a good part to mention, that when Marco Rubio was on the intelligence committee and he had to admit to the public that there are these UFOs, and they showed the pictures in front of the Nimitz, and he said, they're there, but we don't know what they are, is what he said basically. And all physicists were saying there's no physical way that human or biologics could be in one of these things and it make the tangential turns and sudden accelerations to thousands of miles an hour. Those have to be fallen angelic beings. So that's just kind of a side step to all that.
Yeah, I remember when I spoke with Dr. Ross a couple of years ago, we were talking about this, and he says, yeah, there's no way these are another alien human life form. These are species from another dimension. I'm paraphrasing what he said. So he agreed with you, with so many other biblical scholars out there, that these are demonic entities from another realm, but not from another universe.
Well, you think about it. I'm not sure if you're a person that believes in the rapture or not. Okay, so if a rapture occurs, 2 billion Christians are going to disappear all at once. And there's going to have to be some explanation for this. And what greater explanation does suddenly a large mothership present in the atmosphere and say, yes, these guys, we had actually made you guys a million years ago, and we took these guys, beamed them up, and we're putting them in stasis because they're climate deniers or whatever. So everyone will feel much more comfortable. And then some guy's going to jump on a ship and go up there and come back and say, well, they told me I'm going to run things.
Yeah, and I was a skeptic half of my life, so I understand many skeptics would turn it rather to mean that aliens abducted all of these people than God did something with people. So yeah, that's more plausible
for them. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And not only that, but it gave them an excuse to how to run the world at that point of time. And, whoever this guy is that's going to rule on the earth and cause such destruction, he's going to be a lot like Elon Musk. He's not Elon Musk, I'm saying, but Elon Musk has the rockets. He can get up to space if he wants to. He's controlling the news. He's controlling the internet around the world. So maybe this guy's going to have a better form of artificial intelligence than anyone's ever come up with or something, so he can control everything. But it's going to be interesting to see. And oh, by the way, there are supposedly 3 large ships, they think, that are coming towards our planet and way out in space, and they swear that they're coming. So, I'm going to imagine that they're going to disappear at the end. But
are you talking about that interstellar Atlas object?
Yes. I mean, I think they're going to keep making dodges, because that's basically the angels can be doing that. And then at the last minute, if the rapture, they don't know when the rapture is. I mean, nobody knows when the rapture. When they were sitting on top of the Mount of Olives in Acts 1, it says, are you going to bring in Israel's kingdom at this time? It says, not for you to know, but only the Father to set these times. And then he went up in the heavens. And so they were like, oh, dang. So that's basically it. We don't know and we can't know. These date setters, and we're seeing a lot lately, are completely off theologically to try to do that sort of thing.
I read in the last month or two, I read a few articles when it comes to that interstellar object called Atlas and then slash something. The last article I read, I think it came from this week, maybe the week prior, and it said that object is changing colors and it's becoming green, which is funny because I set up tonight's wallpaper for our podcast to be green.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is true. I mean, how do you know? But if it's true, that's, to me, it's fascinating.
It is. Well, and that's it. In my own opinion, if it's angelic, then it's going to have to disappear because they can't force the rapture. If that's their hand of trying to force the rapture, God's not going to allow it, I don't think. So basically, they'll have to just disappear at the last minute, and everyone's going to say, "Where'd they go?" And then they'll send another one. So that's my prediction.
You know what? I didn't think that way because for me, I don't even think that angels or demons need to fly in some spaceship to come here. They cross through the dimensions all the time. So if this has any intelligence, I'll be confused to what is it, but I wouldn't think it will be angelic or maybe necessarily demonic.
Well, no, angels don't have to get in it, but they may be making some empty husk move along or not even something there. In other words, they can affect electromagnetic signals and the spectrum to see something there, just by the way just the power that they have. So that may be the case if it's angelic related. Otherwise, maybe it's just a strange, asteroid or something. But
Anyway, going back to chapter 4, subchapter initial sight, I like the beginning. Well, not the beginning. On page 36, Dr. Ross says that there are these Goldilocks planets which resemble Earth in that they possess both carbon and liquid water, two of the basic requirements for life. That's where the similarity ends. Earth holds nearly 1,200 times less carbon-based atmospheric gas and about 500 times less liquid water than planets of similar size and surface temperature. Earth's paucity of liquid water allows continents to form, and the combination of continents, rivers, lakes, and seas provides for multiple habitats and efficient nutrition recycling for advanced life. Earth's thin atmosphere permits the existence of creatures with lungs. Just the very beginning makes you think and imagine all of these things. And again, wow, God, you did all of this amazing. Any comment on this beautiful subject?
Yeah, there's this stuff going around on the internet and everything that says, oh, we have a planet that's got water, therefore life can exist. And if you read Paul Davies, he says exactly the same thing that Hugh Ross does. That's a non-starter. In fact, too much water destroys the ability for life. You almost have to have a desert planet that has a thin veneer of water, and that's what we have. We are, in essence, almost a desert. So, that's one of the things that the origin of life people try to look at. They look at another planet, they see water on it, they go, oh, it can have life. And it's a ridiculous argument. It really doesn't hold water, if you will.
Yeah, thanks for that. Also on the next page, I love that he says, given Earth's great abundance of such metals, phosphorus, fluorine, aluminum, titanium, uranium, and thorium, for example, astrophysicists recognize that our planet and its solar system companions could not have formed anywhere near our galaxy's core rotation radius. And I remember elsewhere in the book that he mentions that if there wouldn't be over millions, maybe even billions of years, comets and asteroids hitting the Earth, bringing water, bringing all these minerals, bringing all these elements that when we dig deep, through the Earth's crust and we find diamonds, we find all these rare minerals, they wouldn't be there if God didn't allow such a process and such a long epoch or era of time that where, these things had to happen again. And then the formation of continents and all of these things, and then the oxygen, so that our life can start and then we can flourish in that type of environment. Because before that, we would die. Our lungs wouldn't develop. We wouldn't have all these minerals that, like you said, maybe 30 minutes ago, we'll be still stuck in the Stone Age, because without all these minerals, we wouldn't have more advanced technology cross from Stone Age to Bronze Age to all these ages to the modern times. And I'm again and again I'm just blown away with God's technicality and being so detailed to the last letter of providing abundance of life for us.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this book really lays it out. Romans 1:20 says that you can't look out there without seeing the nature of God, so that you're without excuse. But in no school do we teach this book. Basically, this book almost ought to be standard high school teaching. Just to understand, you don't have to talk about God at all. In fact, he could take the words God out of any part of things or intelligent design. Just teach it. The facts that are there, and everyone will come away with, holy cow, this was incredibly rare and exquisite. Now, you're talking about the meteors that are hitting. For every square yard on the planet Earth, 200 metric tons of meteors hit. In other words, it's 1 kilogram thick of meteors that hit the Earth. So when we're looking for stuff, it's all buried in there. In fact, if you go back to that chapter of Job 28, it talks about looking for wisdom. And in the same way you look for wisdom, you're looking for these gold and everything underneath the ground. Well, one thing that's interesting, and they've just discovered about gold, is that it's made in the heart of neutron star collisions. It makes all the heavier stuff, the really heavy elements, and it blows it out in an explosion, and this stuff hits the ground. And if you notice, it's always got quartz in the gold. That's because quartz is the hitting of the gold on the ground and the sand. It turns it into quartz as it hits, and then it goes and gets buried down due to all these things. Well, gold is talked about, and I forget which day of Genesis, where I guess it's Genesis day 6 that there's gold. There's a good gold it talks about. Well, that stuff had to come about because of a neutron star explosion, which meant, this happened a long time ago, and it hit the Earth and it turned around and it came to the top. So even though Genesis is a very magnificent overview of everything, it's not a science book that includes every possible thing. But the more we learn from science, the more we see just how accurate that Genesis is a descriptor, but also that it's got stuff that's not talked about. You can hang on it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Switching to the next subchapter, a timely relocation. Dr. Ross says this: the sun and its accompanying suite of planets, asteroids, and comets could not stay for long in their place of origin. This system had to leave this highly energetic star cluster in order to become suitable for life support. However, not just any kind and direction of departure would do. To stay intact, the solar system had to be ejected outward in the opposite direction from the galactic center along a trajectory that avoided any points that could spell disaster for life's future possibility. Dr. Ross, as much as he's amazing, I get lost in every chapter with all these things because unfortunately I'm not an astrophysicist. So when I read his sentences, I'm like, this is beautiful, but also can be very complex. Can you make it simple for us?
Well, this is what we were talking about the bands and the arms of the Milky Way. We actually have to form in the band, but then we have to migrate out to the space that's between the bands, if that makes sense. Why do we have to be in the bands? Because of all the stuff, the stars and everything else that forms the planet and the protoplanet. But then as it moves out, it gets away from those things because they're causing all kinds of radiation, etc. So that's kind of what he's talking about. It has to migrate out at just exactly the right amount. So did you also catch the aluminum 26 conversation? Was that in this chapter?
I honestly don't know. Where is that?
We'll get
Do you want to mention that just in case?
No, I'm just trying to find where you're at.
Okay, yeah. So on chapter 40, there's this last subchapter we can cover briefly. It says it's called "Staying Within the Plane," and it says all stars in the Milky Way galaxy, including the Sun, move slowly up and down relative to the plane of the galaxy's disk as they orbit the galactic center. The Milky Way galaxy's stellar disk is about 1,000 light years thick, which means that the population of disk stars extends from about 500 light years above the disk plane to about 500 light years below it. A typical star in a disk of this size will bounce up and down from near the top of the disk to near the bottom, from 400 plus light years above the galactic plane to 400 plus light years below, over several million years. And then he expounds on this. And again, my mind is blown because, as he said previously, our universe, and including Milky Way, it's very dynamic. It's not just static. Yeah, you see the stars moving, but it's more than they're just moving. It's almost like, it's not, it's almost, God as the perfect clockmaker.
Yeah.
God as the perfect designer put all of these in their route, just like he organized the way of life on Earth. Like for example, even though I'm not saying that planets are alive, but just the same way birds have installed quote unquote radars and sonars to know, like, hey, in the wintertime we're flying south. So they're able to fly thousands of miles and finding the perfect spot without ever being there previously. The stars are moving in a similar fashion. Galaxies are moving in a similar fashion. And all of that helps us to sustain life. Without it, the universe will be static and will be dead. So my mind always goes like, wow, I didn't know. So many things I didn't know. Anything you want to do to conclude this chapter? I mean, anything you would like to?
Actually, I kind of talked about this a little bit. It's about the disk is about 1,000 light years across, and as it goes up and down, as you get out of the disk, the radiation exposure gets much higher, and this probably correlates to some of the mass extinctions that have occurred. But nevertheless, because we were single cellular organisms, that were there, they didn't get affected by it as much. But for human beings to live, we could not live during one of those exposures. But the good thing is that the periodicity of it is a good 500 million years. So we're in a good spot for at least 500 million years.
Okay, thank you. Switching to chapter 5, which is named Site Preparations, and to the first subchapter called Gas Giant Guardians. I love this. Actually, two sentences at the end of page 44. At the same time, the existence of a suite of relatively distant gas giant planets is essential to protect any rock planets from taking too many destructive hits from asteroids and comets. Such a suite of planets act like a gravitational shield for any potential habitable planet. And before that, Dr. Ross speaks of these of rocky planets like ours exist among other ways. One of the ways our planets can exist is that, especially planet and produce life, is because these nearby giants, gas giants, they protect us from any, bigger cosmic events. And as I read elsewhere, it could be also in this chapter, is that these giant gas stars throughout universe that God puts strategically, I would add, would basically supplement as the universe is spreading out. They'll give fuel to the nearby stars, to the spreading of the universe, to the spreading of the Milky Way. And I was like, man, like, even though these are dead planets, you would never think they have any purpose, but in God's design they do, because they're part of something bigger. They supply gas and energy to something else, and also they protect us from these bigger hits, from the bigger comets. So again, I'm very amazed when it comes to just one thing in God's design have multiple purposes.
Do you remember about 10 to 15 years ago, there was a Shoemaker-Levy asteroid that hit Jupiter? It was a big deal. I don't know if you remember it.
I don't.
It was a perfect case and sample, because Jupiter took the hit rather than Earth. If that thing had come in closer to the planet, to the sun, we could have gotten hit by it. And that's the very first planet that was discovered outside of our solar system happened to be a large gas giant. But it was very, very close, and they couldn't believe it, because all the models said that they thought they all formed like Jupiter and Neptune did. Well, as it turns out, Jupiter and Neptune were in very close. However, due to the resonance that they had or their kind of magnetism to one another, they wound up pushing themselves outwards. And as they went outwards, they sucked up all these asteroids that were in asteroid belts to make life possible. If these asteroids kept sliding into the Earth over and over again, it would cause massive destruction. Yeah, that's Shoemaker right there. Yeah, you can see it on the bottom, on the right in the middle. The hits where you see the orange one. Yeah, it left a scar, and I'm not sure if it's still going, but it left a scar for a long time. And that's a perfect example of the protection that's going on because of Jupiter.
It says if the fragment of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 had hit Earth instead of Jupiter, the impacts would have been catastrophic, potentially causing an impact winter with widespread darkness, temperature drops, and crop failures due to dust and debris in the atmosphere. This is amazing. I don't know if even, let's say that the theory of dinosaurs dying because of the asteroids, I'm not saying I believe or don't believe, I honestly don't know, but let's say that's hypothetically true. Would this, can this be compared to something like that?
This is much larger. The dinosaur asteroid is down in Yucatan. You can actually see the underwater picture of it, and there's really almost no doubt to it. But that was a small thing. This thing would have completely blown the Earth apart. I mean, it would have been a life ender, and it was just huge. So, but guess what? These sort of things were flying around the solar system all the time. The only reason we weren't getting blown away by it was because we had Jupiter and Neptune, and Jupiter kind of pushed Neptune even further out, and it just sucked up all these asteroids that would have been hitting us. And they wound up carrying them behind. If you look at them circulating around in the solar system, it's like a strain of them that are falling behind them like little ducks, and they're just and they keep them in line. And life would be. But what's fascinating, though, is by finding these other planets out there, which are gas giants, they're all in close to their suns. If Jupiter were in close to our sun, it would suck us right into it or throw us out of our solar system. This had to be a just right thing that occurred for it to slide outwards and take Neptune out and grab a lot of asteroids with it as it went. It's just like they're amazed that this happened. It's another anthropic principle.
Yeah, thank you for that. The last subchapter from this chapter, which was chapter 5, let's talk briefly about moon forming event. Why is, Dr. Mancha, why is moon formation and moon's existence in general important for us? Does it serve as another shield? How does it affect us? How does it improve our life? Anything you would like to say when it comes to pages between 48 till, I don't know, 52, let's say.
I'm not sure if I heard the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was talking about how is the moon formation and the moon's existence in general important for us as the planet Earth and also for human existence, if you want to just summarize this subchapter.
Now, what's interesting is when Apollo went to the moon and brought all the rocks back, they thought they were going to figure out where the moon came from, and they couldn't. What happened was they had to have the computing power and the supercomputers to simulate a moon formation, and that's when they figured it out. And it's really not a question anymore. The moon was formed by a planet called Theia that was in our orbit, actually, and it glanced at just the right angle, at just the right speed. I think it was going like 4 kilometers per second. If it had been any more of a glance, we would have destroyed the Earth. And more importantly, when it hit the Earth, it pulled all this material out into the sky that circled around the Earth, and the heavy parts of the moon, the uranium and the thorium, the iron, those things went into the Earth like a jelly donut. They did notice with the Rune rocks that the iron level was lower, and they couldn't explain it. Not only that, but the moon was 50 times larger in proportion to any other moon. I mean, if you look at the moons of Jupiter, they're relatively small compared to the size of Jupiter. Why did we have this massive moon? So the only explanation could have been that it formed by this collision. But if it had not formed correctly, we would not have the liquid iron core, the solid iron core with liquid iron going around it, plus all the thorium and uranium to heat it up. And you know what that generates? That generates the Van Allen belts, which protects us. We would go out on this if we didn't have those. We would stand outside and get a skin cancer within a few days and die. So all that had to happen in just the right way. And we're not even talking about all the things that it did to the microbiology and those sort of organisms. So it's a once in a quadrillion hit, really. Probably more than that. So you keep adding these things on, and really, literally, you have to put a wet towel around your head.
Thank you so much for that explanation. It really helps. As you were talking, I was trying to imagine how that would look like, and I'm like, wow, even disasters, if led and controlled by God, they can be so beneficial for us because God cares, and nothing is happening outside of His knowledge.
That's it. That's it. We have to have the disasters to make the good. So it all works together. It's not. I mean, God could have made everything a sphere, a perfect sphere. Well, in fact, He's going to do this in the Book of Revelation. It talks about the new heavens and the new earth. There's not going to be a sun. There's not going to be water. It's going to be. There's not going to be any entropy. He's going to make things like that. He could have made things like that if He wanted to, but He made it all basically to show the angels that the wonderful things He can do, and also for mankind to learn about as well. And
when it comes to chapter 6 that he titled, Dr. Russ, Not Quite Ready, he says on page 62, he says, during the next era, a number of events, some interdependent and some intricately connected, not only prepared Earth's surface for unicellular life, but also cleared away obstacles that would have prevented the future arrival and survival of more advanced, ultimately human life. And then he deals on the next couple of pages, he deals with invisible hazards. If you can maybe just spend a few sentences, if you would like to, just commenting briefly on those hazards and God's protecting us from that.
Well, there's a whole series of hazards. There's the ultraviolet light. If it's we need it to cause a certain amount of things. It's like a just right situation. Can't have too much, can't have too little. The iron that's in the soil and other things like that. He talked about the concept of the soil. We think of the dirt as just being inert, right? Well, God took Adam out of the dirt and He made him into a being. I mean, the stuff that's in the dirt's absolutely incredible, and every human being has got the dirt in their bodies. But it's one thing after another that prepares these bacteria and other things to make life possible. Let me see. Oh, by the way, there's an interesting quote here in the previous chapter about David Waldheim. He considered the moon as a tool to test the power and the scope of the anthropic principle. So, they realize this is crazy. How did this happen? So anyway, I just wanted to throw that one in there. I think I've got, actually, I'm having a hard time keeping up with you because I'm on my phone. He's talking about there's just a lot of preparation that's necessary to give life a chance. Like another 500 million years of our sun and the planets and other nearby objects affecting us. So, again, it's a slow, methodical process, and they all have to work together. The sun's X-ray, and I mentioned the ultraviolet radiation. If it exceeded by order of magnitude, we wouldn't be alive. Also, the way the sun is forming, its luminosity was different back in the past, and we have just the right amount of luminosity now for life. So that's another factor that's going on. The sun is becoming more efficient in burning, so it's brighter. That's another factor. And he mentions the Nice model. I'm not sure if you saw that. And they basically discuss the interplanetary dance that's going on, because the Nice model sees Jupiter and Uranus as dancing correctly together. And if they didn't do that dance, life wouldn't be possible because they're gathering up the asteroids out there. Not only that, but they formed the Kuiper Belt, which is past the Uranus. It's a fixed area out there, and it's also formed the Oort cloud. The Oort cloud is 1 light year out. It's incredibly far out there. One of the things there are certain creationists who don't believe the Oort cloud, and because they don't like the idea of long period comets coming in. I mean, we've discovered in the last year there was a comet that has over a million year orbit to it. And then another one that just happened last month is 22,000 year orbit. And this is Newtonian stuff, simple math. At least the world is at least 22,000 years old. But the 22,000 year came in from Kuiper Belt, whereas the other one came in from the Oort cloud. But they said, well, there is no Oort cloud. So, it's hard to argue with that. But the reason we can't confirm it is it's a light year out there. And even the Webb telescope cannot see stuff that's very close and very small and it's only a light year away. It sees big, galaxies and other things that are much further away, but stuff that doesn't have any light to them because they don't have a sun in it, right? It's big dirt clods and frozen dirt is really what it is, and with maybe 100-mile radius. And now, eventually, we're going to see one of them and say, "Aha, this is part of the Oort cloud," but they'll complain about that. So, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing from this chapter, and then we'll switch to the next one, because you just talked about Uranus, Neptune, Jupiter. So at the end of page 75, Dr. Ross says, if any of these gas giant planets' orbital positions were to shift even slightly, that shift would generate instabilities in the orbit of one or more of the solar system's 8 planets. Such instabilities would shatter the possibility of a long history of life on Earth, a history leading to human life and civilization. I was like, wow.
Okay. Have you ever seen those little balls that's got a string on it and they click back and forth that you used to have on your desk? You know I'm talking about, little swinging balls. Well, this is almost like that. The planet.
Oh, the metal ones.
Yeah.
Do this.
Okay. Think of those balls attached with little springs that doesn't allow them to go too far. And if you click one and the other one clicks out, there's this resonance between all the different planets that has to be lined up absolutely correctly. If one gets out of whack with the other, it could wind up getting thrown out of the solar system, which could wind up affecting everything else, especially for the Earth. So, it's an amazing, just looking at what they call as the resonance of these planets and how they affect one another and how they go around past one another. And of course, the largest amount of it is affected by Jupiter and Neptune. So that's what he's talking about there.
Okay, thank you. Switching to chapter 7, and we'll be done relatively soon. Dr. Ross makes a distinction between biogenesis and abiogenesis, and he says that skeptics, secular people, they don't believe in biogenesis as creation from another living being, but they believe in abiogenesis as the outcome of strictly natural processes at work in non-living matter. If you can please help us summarize the beginning of this chapter.
Okay, well, abiogenesis is basically life from like soup. The first one to use this was Darwin. He talks about the warm little pond, and he's talking to Hooker, another gentleman, and he said that if and only if, and a big if, some things could kind of boil together and that life could come from it. Well, now, all the evolutionists like to separate themselves from Darwin's statement because they just keep proving you can't do that. Abiogenesis, the biggest problem with abiogenesis is you have to have homochiral molecules, and that means a certain handedness to it. The amino acids have to be left-handed, and the nucleic acids have to be right-handed. But okay, let's just say we don't have to worry about homochiral. Let's take a small bacteria, and the smallest bacteria that's anaerobic that we know of is 1.5 million base pairs. Okay, let's take the number 4, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, A, T, C, or G, that's your nucleotides, and let's raise it to the power of 1.5 million. What kind of number is that? it's just off the top ridiculous. There's only 10 to the 80th atoms in the universe. You know, and of course, you know, evolutionists will ignore that sort of math, but it's the math that they have to deal with, and they don't want to recognize. I mean, I would say the greatest proponent of abiogenesis today is Jack Szostak, a man that won the Nobel Prize in medicine. And when he won it, he decided to go over to Harvard to their Origin of Life department, which they're trying to figure this out. And he says, you know, we're left with a biochemist's dream, a pool of homochiral DNA. In other words, that's the dream if we can find it. He's the guy that made up protocells, which are basically soap bubbles, and they don't really replicate the cell membrane. Cell membranes have proteins and other things that carry stuff. It's just a soap bubble. Anything can go through a soap bubble. But he said, okay, I made the membrane. They need to figure out how to get the homochiral molecules. He knows it's impossible, and Origin of Life people know that it's impossible. And also, when they look at the geology of things, they're realizing that their dreams are gone because certain things suddenly show up and certain things disappear, and they don't have the right amount of this or the right amount of that for abiogenesis to even occur. They try to make theories that may indicate their situation, but they're ad hoc at best. And Hugh Ross points them all out in the book. But I like to go to just the homochiral DNA and say, okay, let's just add up your letters and what's the mathematical odds of that. Okay, to be just to make 50 nucleotides attached together, the odds would be 4 times the power of 50. It's ridiculous. Just 50 nucleotides, and 50 nucleotides don't do anything. The smallest gene we know of is about 500 nucleotides. That's 4 to the power of 500. It just doesn't work. You know, they cannot explain these things. This, by the way, was the reason when I was in college and I took my first biology 101 class that I really had no feeling of threat of the concept of evolution, because I just looked at it mathematically and said, they're out of their minds. Yeah, but it really wasn't until the last 10 years that the field of epigenetics came out and I started reading about it, and it blows away evolution. And I mean, we are now seeing the crumbling of evolution. Most people don't realize it. You know, I'm in a couple of the atheist groups, and I'll post some stuff, and they'll go, "What?" You know, they don't want to believe it. I said, you know, read on it, you'll find out. So, yeah, the theory of evolution has been disproven basically in the last 20 years. And so this is part of that.
Okay, thank you. The last thing from this chapter, let's switch to pages 91 and 92. Dr. Ross speaks of the essential magnetic fence, and he says, for the just right organisms to be present at the just right times, to lay the foundation for a long, diverse, and complex life history, the habitable planet must be able to maintain a powerful, stable magnetic field. Without a protective electromagnetic fence, a planet's atmosphere eventually would be sputtered away by the host star's particle radiation. Without a just magnetic field, even a carefully balanced environment of solar and cosmic radiation will wreak havoc on surface life. And yet, God made this magnetic field to protect us. Any comment on that?
Well, this is basically goes back to the moon collider. The Earth did not have enough stuff in its middle to cause the Van Allen belts. We were dead at the beginning. We had to have this extra metal that came from the moon and that planet called Theia to hit and inject all that uranium and thorium and iron, so that we now have a dynamo at the middle of our planet, and it creates the Van Allen belts, and it basically clears away the attack of everything. So that was an incredibly lucky hit, right? That we had that, and without it, we wouldn't have life today.
Okay, thank you. Switching to chapter 9, subchapter. Well, let me just read the title of chapter 9. It's called Up to Ground Level. Subchapter Achieving Ground Level, page 111 says, although today we consider earthquakes a dreaded danger to life, research reveals a synergetic relationship between Earth's life and Earth's movable crust. Life needs plate tectonics to persist, and plate tectonic activity needs life to persist. It especially needs photosynthetic life. And then by the end of that page, he says that even with abundant, enduring photosynthetic life, 500 million years passed before small, stable continents emerged. Certain tectonic conditions that existed on isolated regions on Earth's surface, along with rapid erosion and deposition of sediments, led to quote-unquote localization of rock uplift and higher topography. So again, what we may consider as natural disasters, God has to bring in order to do certain things. I remember when I spoke with very briefly about this topic with Dr. Hugh Ross a couple of years ago, and I said, Dr. Ross, I saw that in one of the videos on some other podcasts, you talked that even earthquakes or hurricanes or tornadoes can be big because they're bringing cooling of the, cooling the nature, cooling the ocean. They can bring. I don't know what was if he was mentioning some other life forms being moved from one to another ecosystem. Some things that we don't think about, because when we see tornado, of course, it's scary because it brings destruction. But even in fire, when trees are burned, there's new life coming out of that. And I forgot which articles I read before, not from him, just in general scientific, that says that wildfire once in a while is good to bring balance and to bring new life, even though it's destructive at the very beginning. It's scary. So any comment on God allowing things such as earthquakes because they're beneficial for the formation of continents and moving tectonic plates?
Well, what he's talking about is photosynthetic life is necessary, and it gets pulled underneath, and it creates a thinner troposphere, basically the top of the planet, so that it can move. And as far as I can tell, looking back at things, it's miraculous that life started, only 10 million years after the Large Hadron collisions were going on. So this stuff was working all along, and it allowed our continents to expand and come back together. And it did this like 5 times. And I didn't know this. I was thinking just you had Pangea and it spread apart, but no, it was actually going apart and coming back together. And it was in large part due to photosynthetic, stuff going on. And again, how did this stuff exist? We had to have, the homochiral DNA and all sorts of things. So that's another argument. But nevertheless, it's not that the Earth just shaped itself by itself. It had to have life on it to do these things. And this is something I forgot about when I read this book. I think I read this book 10 years ago. An interesting way to tell how old this book is he said at the writing of this book, there were 2,000 known planets. But as of about a week ago, there's 6,000 planets that they've found. So it's you could tell.
Are you talking about planets that that have water, or suppose they can
just planets, just extra solar system planets.
Okay.
Some of which they're wishful about, but they can't until they explain these other things. They can't hope for those. I mean, the majority of those planets have gas giants too close to the sun to do anything. We don't have that. Jupiter moved away from the sun in a magical way, right? So.
Okay, the last thing from this chapter is on page 114. He says that if a planet's interior is too hot, however, the viscosity of the mantle often will be too low to produce stress fractures sufficient to break the crust up into plates. On the other hand, if the planet's interior is too cold, the velocities of the flow, I don't know how to pronounce this, eddies, in the mantle will be too slow to generate any movement of the plates relative to one another. In either case, the planet would develop a stagnant lid, which is a permanently fixed, unmovable crust. And again and again and again, God is proving himself to do everything in perfect order, not too much, not too low. Everything when it comes to temperature, position, location, laws of science, and everything when it comes to atmospheric pressure, heat, everything when it comes to magnetic field, when it comes to formation of continents, everything happened in proper moment, not with elements and qualities not too high, not too low. So this also really impressed me how God had to put the mantle's temperature in a perfect way in order for continents to form.
Well, yeah, and you see everybody jumping up about Mars and life on Mars and all that sort of stuff. Well, it simply can't happen because its crust is just fixed, and not only that, it's tidal fixed. In other words, one side, I believe, just faces the sun all the time. So one side is really hot and one side's cold. Our moon is tidally fixed. You have the dark side of the moon. I don't know if you're a Pink Floyd fan, but okay, it's frozen over there. The planet has to rotate. You have to have plate tectonics, which means you have to have photosynthetic bacteria, which helps with that and makes the viscosity at just the right amount so that it can break up and move apart and come back together again. So it's just another series of factors. It would be almost interesting if he would put in the book what the odds ratio are and what we're up to at this point. Because I think we're probably up to about one chance and 10 to the trillion or something. It's you can't put all these facts in your head without just. Now, a lot of people would say, well, these are overstated facts that maybe they're not true, but he doesn't quote his own work. He quotes these other guys' work. So, if you want to say something's wrong, you have to complain about them. These are guys that went out there to try to make it more habitable or more palatable, and only to find out that it was worse than they thought.
Okay, we have one more chapter to cover, and we'll be done briefly. Chapter 10, called Air Conditioning. On page 111, Dr. Ross says, the air on our planet must be precisely managed to prevent the unique suffering or death of its life forms. However, different kinds of life at different times in Earth's history possess different atmospheric requirements. Typically, the more advanced the life form, the more atmospheric oxygen it needed to thrive. Thus, Earth's preparation for advanced life entailed appropriate oxygenation of the atmosphere. And we can start with the subchapter that is called Precise Timing, where God had to do these things on page 123 that says, the timing of this carries great significance for the possibility and timing of human civilization. The window of time during which advanced civilization is possible remains open at most just a few tens of thousands of years. Therefore, in this time, if this has occurred any later, eventful resources necessary for the launch and sustenance of global civilization resulting from the boost in atmospheric oxygen would have been severely limited. On the other hand, if this had occurred any earlier, the sun would have lacked the luminosity needed to prevent Earth from becoming a long-term ice ball, which would have risked the closure of the civilization time window. Praise God. Any comment on this?
Well, he's talking about that great oxygenation event. And, you can actually parallel to Genesis 1 without talking about the plants coming about. It's still a little bit eisegesis, so it's kind of hard to do that. But it is interesting, though, that period occurs right before the next period where the luminosity shone through. So, and that's consistent with Job 38, how the dark covering that was around the earth suddenly showed up so that the lights could be seen. And that could be a reference to the great oxygenation they're talking about here. This again is dependent upon the bacteria that comes along that produce the oxygen that's necessary, and it has to do it at exactly the right time. And it has to be careful not to make too much, because oxygen is a toxin when it's too high. It can't be too low, or else we can't have life. So it's a just so thing. So in the photosynthetic life, of course, he says it's about 4 billion years ago, and the oxygen level remained low, no more than 0.01% of the current atmospheric level. However, it started to get higher with the Great Oxygenation event. An explosion occurred, and also it helped the continental crust volume as a result of this. And this is because the photosynthetic life started coming about, and it made prodigious amounts of oxygen. But at least a few 100 million years before before things started to happen. So this also works in with what's called the methogens. And there are different types of bacteria work in tandem with photosynthetic life to transfer the carbon dioxide and water and methogen. It gets into a lot of chemical formulations, which I don't think we should go into. So that's kind of the part that he was talking about in general, the Great Oxygenation event.
Yeah, thank you so much for your help, Dr. Mancha. We covered about 10 chapters of the book. For the rest, I have provided the Amazon link to Dr. Ross's book. Please buy it. It's not expensive. It's one of those books. I have 4 of Dr. Ross's books. He always tries to reconcile what he calls the book of the scriptures and the book of the nature, as he doesn't see this colliding or fighting each other. He sees them in a perfect union. That being said, Dr. Mancha, I want to thank you for helping us understand this beautiful yet complex topic of astrophysics. I love astronomy. I love astrophysics. I am not even an amateur. I just enjoy incredible stories explaining difficulties and difficult theses and theories in simple terms. I enjoy James Webb's beautiful high-resolution images. I watch them almost all the time. I'm excited about what the future and the more advanced telescopes are going to bring us when it comes to more discoveries, more high-Q images. I just want to ask you, do you have any concluding thoughts when it comes to Bible, when it comes to science, but also if you want to bring any so-called pastoral conclusion or message to our skeptical and atheist friends who may be watching this either live or in the days, weeks, years to come, when they see that all these things had to happen for life to start existing and then to thrive. All these numbers had to be perfect at perfect time, perfect location. Everything had to be perfect. That is impossible to exist by itself and to be done just randomly in chaotic, circumstances. How can we correlate this with Jesus and God loving us, creating us in His image, and telling us from the very get-go, hey, life is not coincidence. You're not coincidental. You have life and purpose, just as universe have life and purpose. This universe will go away, but yet you matter to me more than these planets in your universes. What will be your, again, pastoral, scientific, biblical message to people who may be looking about this, intelligent design and fine-tuning of the universe and asking, like, is this even real? But even if it is, what does it mean for me today? What will be our comforting message to them?
Well, I think it shows just how far God will go to prepare a life for us, and that He, and not only that, but this is the easy part. I mean, He could do this all day long, and He does do it all day long. But the greater thing that He's done is the preparation of His Son to die on the cross for us, that we can live forever with Him in complete happiness. So that's a greater thing. And I think this is amazing enough to us to say there's got to be a greater thing. This just couldn't have happened. It's not coincidental. And at least open our minds to the possibility that could happen. Read the book. The thing that discourages me when I see people just dismiss it outright, and that's not only from atheists but also from other creationists who just dismiss things outright. They're not seeing the greater design of God's work. They're kind of paring it down. So that's the take home for me. And it's interesting that Jesus told a story about Lazarus and Abraham, and Abraham, the rich man who was in torments, told Abraham to have Lazarus dip his hand in water so he could put it on his tongue. He's in misery. He said, well, we can't do that. We're in a great gulf fixed. He said, can you at least send Lazarus back to my brothers to tell them about it? He said, they have Moses and the prophets, so let them listen to them. And what that means is you can get on the internet and look up prophecies to see whether they've been fulfilled. You'd be amazed at just how many of them, well, they all have been fulfilled, but just the number, the sheer number is mathematically, impossible to ignore. So if you want to know whether there really is a God, check it out with the prophecies. I think it's one of the most astounding things, because the creation is a miracle enough for me. But if you have real questions about things, whether Jesus existed and others, I think the other way is a great approach.
Dr. Mancha, we stayed a little bit over 100 minutes. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your expertise in helping us dissect to the best of our abilities and time this wonderful yet complex topic of
Astrophysics.
astrophysics. Yeah. And again, we've been dissecting this book, Improbable Planet, the first 10 chapters. Amazon link is provided for all of you. Buy the book, enjoy. And I have 3 more books from Dr. Ross that he wrote about similar and other things that eventually we may cover. Once again, Dr. Mancha, thank you so much for your time and expertise. May God bless you, your ministry that you're doing online, trying to reach out to both of, young earth creationists, to skeptics, by providing data, sources, articles. Most of them are scientific. I applaud you for that, because I see you're always busy being productive. May God bless you, and may God use you as his instrument of, on one side, encouraging the faith of believers, on the other side, bringing skeptics and non-believers to God.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good night. And
Right.
I would just want to say that next week, we'll see you with more guests. Be encouraged, whoever you are, believer or non-believer. Just know this: if God created the whole universe for our existence, how much even more he cares about you individually. So be encouraged to seek God despite of the condition of your soul or sin, or even if you're unsure that he exists. Be encouraged to seek him, and God promised that those who seek him with their whole hearts, they'll find him. May God bless you, and see you next week. Bye-bye.